After an ugly jobs report, President Trump fires the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or BLS, accusing her without any real evidence of rigging the data. Meantime, amid this economic slowdown, Trump unveils a raft of new tariff rates, though a federal court sounds skeptical that he has the power to impose them.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Alicia Finley and Kim Strassel. There's no easy way to sugarcoat the July numbers that the BLS reported on Friday. Net new jobs that month, only about 73,000, and even bigger were the downward revisions of about 250,000 in the numbers previously reported for May and June. One way to judge the impact of a piece of news is to see how big of a splash it makes, and this one has prompted a furious reaction from President Trump in the White House. Here's the president this morning on Truth Social. He said last week's jobs report was rigged, just like the numbers prior to the presidential election were rigged. He went on to say those big adjustments were made to cover up and level out the fake political numbers that were concocted in order to make a great Republican success look less stellar. Let's listen also to President Trump. This is him on Sunday before departing from New Jersey back to Washington, D.C.
We'll be announcing a new statistician sometime over the next 3-4 days. We had no confidence. I mean, the numbers were ridiculous, what she announced, but that was just one negative number. All of the numbers seem to be great, and so we'll see how that comes out. And if you remember, just before the election, this woman came out with these phenomenal numbers on Biden's economy. Phenomenal numbers. And then right after the election, they announced that those numbers were wrong. And that's what they did the other day. So it's a scam, in my opinion. My opinion is it's just additional scam.
Alicia, before we get to that accusation, let's first do the substance and the numbers. What do you see in this jobs report and what it might say about where the economy is or where it's heading in the months to come?
Well, I think it's clear that the economy is softening, or the labor market's softening. We've been seeing that for many months. We were seeing that during the Biden last couple of years of the Biden administration, where you had healthcare, social assistance, and government make up more than half of the new jobs. And now, in this last month, you saw that healthcare and social assistance actually made up all the net new job creation. So in that way, this actually isn't a huge break from that trend. It shows that there are fewer jobs being created, 73,000 in the last month or so. I actually expect that to be downward revised, just like the last couple of months were. We've been getting a lot of downward revisions this year. One other point, that if you look at the jobs report, which also includes both the establishment survey and a separate household survey, but what you see is a declining labor force participation rate. So fewer people are actually looking for work or working. You have an increase in the long-term unemployment, which also suggests that the labor market is softening. So there are many indicators that they're softening. It's not clear that businesses are laying off workers en masse, but they definitely aren't hiring, especially outside of these areas, healthcare and social assistance, which largely depend on government spending.
Same with the jobless numbers, Kim. Journal has a report today. This is a couple of statistics in it. The number of people unemployed for at least 27 weeks topped 1.8 million, the highest since 2017. The median length of unemployment in the United States has also ticked up from a seasonally adjusted 9.5 weeks in July 2024 to 10.2 weeks last month. So that seems to fit the story that we're mulling over here. Is, maybe we're not getting quite close to a recession yet. Maybe there are companies that are not laying off workers, but the hiring seems to have slowed, which it's hard to know. It's hard to know going forward how much that has to do with the trade wars and the tariffs and all the uncertainty, the economic uncertainty that Trump's protectionist policies have put into the economy. But I can only think that it's contributing a big bit to it.
I'd say that it has everything to do with it. We are essentially, the way I would describe the economy right now is that we are in a giant pause. And that fits with all of the numbers Alicia just laid out for you. There's not evidence that people are laying off workers, but they are not growing, they're not expanding, they're not hiring new people. And similarly, as we've seen in some recent other government statistics, private investment has been down. People are simply not making big, robust new plans at the moment. And that makes a lot of sense if you think about it in the uncertainty context you just mentioned, Kyle. If you look at pretty much any business out there, especially if it deals with goods, but even service sectors, some of the biggest components you have to care about as a business owner are your costs, are your supplies, what you're getting, where you're getting them from, and how much they cost, and the cost of your labor, and how available it is and how much you'll have to pay for it. And what we have at the moment is vast uncertainty in terms of a lot of those goods given tariff rates. You've had Donald Trump come out and promise giant new reciprocal tariffs back in the spring. And then there was a pause. And now there are all these kind of jumping willy-nilly. I got a deal here, but this rate's going to go up and this one might go down. And we still haven't sorted them out in some countries. And similarly, what we have too is an enormous pressure on our foreign-born workforce to self-deport or essentially go underground, or there have been actual deportations. And, by some estimates, about half of our labor force increase over the past 3 decades has been foreign-born workers. So this is injecting a whole bunch of uncertainty into who is out there to hire and what you'd have to pay to get a hold of them. And so there's just a great deal of instability in the system. I think it's a testimony to the American economy and its resilience that, given all this uncertainty being thrown at it, we aren't in a recession. We're simply in a pause. And maybe the one big beautiful bill will provide some countervailing balance to that uncertainty. We don't know yet. That isn't baked into any of these numbers that we've been seeing because it came at the end. But for now, this is a big warning signal to the White House to maybe, get its ducks in order and start giving the economy a roadmap to work from.
Now let's turn to the accusation by the president in the White House that the BLS has been cooking the books, as it were, on these jobs numbers. Alicia, your column this week is on this subject under the headline, "Trump claims the jobs report was rigged. Was it?" What's your answer to that question? And, you said a moment ago that what feeds into this data is a couple of surveys. So give listeners a sense of how the BLS actually produces these jobs numbers, this economic data, and then the sources of error or later revisions that, by the way, happen all the time. The fact that the BLS is revising data for recent months is not new, but Trump is trying to make that part of his argument that this is something that is not happening usually.
Right. So there are 2 surveys. There's the household survey that measures surveys households about their employment situation every month. And then there's the establishment survey, and that surveys about 630,000 businesses every month. But the crux is that not all businesses actually respond to this survey, and many don't respond in the first month. So the BLS continues to collect data from them over the following 2 months. And another important point is that small businesses are less likely to respond to this survey, and especially less likely to respond in the first month. So that is why the data gets continually revised over the next 2 months. But you can get some kind of bias when the small businesses aren't hiring at the same rates or laying off workers at higher rates than large businesses. And I think that's, to some extent, what explains the particularly large corrections or downward revisions we've seen in the last couple months. And yes, they are among the largest we've seen in years. But when there's a bias in a sample, in that the small businesses, again, aren't reflective of the larger businesses who are responding and are responding at higher rates early, you get these kinds of revisions. And you also get these kinds of revisions at the what's known as an annual benchmarking. So what the BLS does is, it happens with a lag, is they compare their their numbers to what states collect or administrative records that companies and other employers have to provide to the state unemployment agencies because they get taxed on every single employee. And so the state's unemployment insurance agencies actually have the best and most detailed data on employees and what they earn and all that. But the BLS, after several months, essentially what they do is they try to harmonize the data and find out, well, where did we go wrong? What did our models not account for and all that? And that usually, the first benchmarking usually comes out in August or September. Last August, they revised down their employment by 818,000 for the 12 months through March 2024. We are expecting another benchmarking to come out in another month in September through March 2025, and which may show more downward revisions. But this doesn't mean that the numbers were rigged or anything. It just suggests that they become, as we said, increasingly unreliable because of the sample. When you have a low response rate, 43%, compared to even 60% before the pandemic, and even 60% is probably too low. You get these kind of big swings. Now, there are outside advocacy organizations, meaning the American Statistical Association, which is advocating for some marginal more funding for the BLS to help address these issues in their sampling. There are ways to do this with better technology, but Congress, alas, has not provided that.
But the point is that these are technical questions, statistical questions. I mean, this is a huge country with a big economy, Kim, something like 340 million people living in the U.S. And we sort of sometimes take it for granted. It can be easy to take it for granted that there is a government statistic that will explain exactly what is happening in minute detail. And what goes into that is often overlooked, but it is a hard problem trying to get to the answer of exactly what is happening always in an economy that size and with as little lag as possible. We're here in the early months of August talking about the July jobs numbers. So there are a lot of questions of how you statistically do that and how you do it with as little error as possible. Maybe Congress could help by adding some funding to give the BLS more tools. By the way, the BLS director who was fired by President Trump was confirmed by the Senate 86-8. So this is not typically a partisan, a controversial position. This is somebody who has a history of statistics and data, and the Senate thinks can lead the agency effectively. But Kim, do you think that it is smart politics or wise for President Trump to be blaming the BLS for these jobs numbers? I mean, Trump often takes that kind of approach. I don't know. I won't speculate how many mega voters would be convinced by the idea that the BLS is against him, but many of them are convinced that the 2020 election, for example, was rigged, which he keeps saying. On the other hand, it strikes me as shooting the messenger is kind of the same way that the Biden administration did when they said, don't mind these high inflation figures that keep coming out of the agencies. It's transitory. That didn't work out so well for President Biden in the end.
I mean, the thing that I find so infinitely surreal about this whole episode is that anyone begins from the proposition that government's going to get something right. I mean, we should be amazed if government ever gets something right. And the notion that everybody looks at these numbers and goes, well, the government produced them, they must be great. What else does the government do that it ever gets right? So this is kind of strange on its face. And then you drill down into it. And as you said, this is traditionally a nonpartisan job. This woman was confirmed with huge bipartisan support because the BLS is not a political agency, it really just isn't. What it is an agency riddled with a lot of uncertainty given all the complications that Alicia just laid out. There's also vast amounts of just statistical uncertainty every month when they try to do this. And the problem I see for Donald Trump here is that maybe it helps him in the short term with some in his base out there to say, oh, this is the deep state working against me. The deep state statisticians, the deep state statisticians have it in for me, and they're going to mess with my job numbers. But in the end, one thing that is notable is that while figuring out economic trends is difficult as you go along, over time, they do tend to show a picture and more add up. And there's going to be a point, if the economy really is in a downturn, this will become undeniable at a certain point. And then he's going to look a bit silly by not heeding some of this early indications that there might be some problems out there. So my concern for the administration in going this route is it is a temporary Band-Aid from a PR perspective, and it's not dealing with some of the true underlying issues. And this is going to be immensely important for Trump and Republicans. If they want to hold Congress next year, the economy is going to have to improve. He did a fantastic job his first term. What's the big difference? The second term, lots of things are the same. He's doing good job on taxes, good job on regulation. This tariff mess is a mess. And that is the secret ingredient in some of these bad things that you are seeing coming out in the warning signals in the economy.
But remarkable how White House advisors are now stepping up to back up the president's complaints about the BLS. Let's listen to Kevin Hassett, White House economic advisor, on Fox News Sunday.
If I were running the BLS, I don't aspire to. If I were running the BLS and I had the biggest downward revision in 50 years, I would have a really, really detailed report explaining why it happened so that everybody really trusted the data. We had this move, that move, that move. We had a bunch of people get their responses in late or something like that. But instead, they have this little black box that moves the numbers around and makes people wonder, sometimes with partisan patterns. And so I think what we need is a fresh set of eyes at the BLS, somebody who can clean this thing up.
Another quote I found notable, this is Labor Secretary Lori Chavez de Reamer on social media, and she is in charge of the BLS. Reports up to her. She says, I agree wholeheartedly with POTUS that our jobs numbers must be fair, accurate, and never manipulated for political purposes, unquote. And Alicia, part of what I find so funny about that is a little attempted jujitsu, perhaps. She's not saying that she believes that the BLS numbers are manipulated. She just says she agrees with the president that they must never be manipulated for political purposes.
I think that's right. It is kind of hilarious because she earlier basically gave credence to the numbers by trumpeting, though, that we're still seeing job growth and basically trying to make lemons or lemonade out of lemons with the job report. So she was tacitly conceding that they probably are accurate, but now she's in this position where she doesn't want to contradict the president's accusations. Now, I think what's also important to note is, well, what could happen next month? We're going to get another jobs report at the beginning of September. And what will happen if the BLS numbers show more downward revisions or, God forbid, job losses? Now, what's going to be the explanation there? Or is Trump just going to order them not to produce the report or to change the numbers? I think he's put himself in a little bit of a pickle here by firing the commissioner and claiming it was the jobs numbers are rigged. Again, there's ample criticism. You could say, well, these numbers are becoming less reliable. Maybe we need to look into that, like Kevin Hassett said, maybe do some kind of audit, what's exactly behind all this. But basically saying that there's a conspiracy will give Democrats just more ammunition for if there's positive numbers, and they'll claim that they're rigged, but also puts him in that difficult spot of what's it going to be his explanation if more bad data comes out.
In the meantime, though, President Trump is powering forward with his trade protectionist agenda. Kim, on Thursday, the president published his latest list of tariff rates for his reciprocal tariffs, everything from 25% on India, 25% on Moldova, 40% on Myanmar, 40% on Laos, interesting 39% on Switzerland. I was reading a journal story this morning about a Swiss company that makes components for industrial machines that make cars, planes, and watches. A lot of that stuff comes to the United States. This company had been planning on maybe opening a office in Indiana. And that is an example, I think a perfect example of how this trade stuff gets complicated when you get down into the details. I mean, I get the president's argument that we should make all of our components for industrial machines here and not rely on a Swiss company for any of that. But at least in the short term, it's going to have consequences when a company like that that was going to open an office in Indiana and hire people in Indiana decides that it has to put that on pause because it's not sure what to do about these 39% tariffs. And similarly, companies that rely on those components at the moment, that's part of their supply chain. We need that component for our factory in the United States that is making cars or whatever. Suddenly those components might be 39% more expensive. And I think that is maybe a good example of why these kinds of shifting rates has led these companies to freeze a lot of the expansions or the work that might actually contribute to increasing jobs numbers that President Trump wants to see.
This gets to the uncertainty point that I've been trying to get across. I mean, and in that regard, this latest presidential order coming out setting new rates, there's a little bit of progress. I mean, the silver lining here is that for 68 countries and for the EU, which is a block of 27 countries, there is now a set rate. So there is some sort of certainty there, at least for the short term. Now, many of them have ended up having rates that are a lot higher than they were at the beginning of this year, obviously before Trump became president. And they have clearly made the decision that they're willing to eat that if it gives them that kind of certainty and they know what the plan is going forward. But there are still dozens upon dozens of countries that did not get a deal done with the president in time. And so there's been more extensions for certain countries. Mexico, for instance, has a 90-day extension. And while the Trump administration has said that there's not going to be any more extensions for those countries, I'm sure some of them are still banking that they can maybe get in with the administration here or there. So there's still a lot of uncertainty out there for a lot of different players, especially our key trading partners. I mean, if you look at the list of those that were decided versus those that were not, some of our biggest partners, including Mexico, Canada, and China, are still all on the list of we don't know where that lands. And so the sooner this gets done, the better. And of course, the additional unknown thing here is, will these tariffs even be upheld as legal in courts? And so that's hanging over everything as well.
Alicia, to that point, the Federal Circuit, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit on Thursday heard oral arguments in one of these challenges against the president's tariff powers that he's claiming, at least, under the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA. And I agree with Kim that is part of the uncertainty here, because my read of this is that the court is probably going to strike that down. And then the question is, what other tariff authorities does Trump try to rely on? Where does he go from there? And so even if that is a victory for free traders, it's not clear then that clears the tariff deck, to use an analogy there. Alicia, what was your read of that oral argument by the Federal Circuit?
I think all 11 judges that sat there, in which included judges from across the political spectrum, or who were nominated by presidents going back to Ronald Reagan, Clinton, George H.W. Bush, Obama, and Trump, they were all very skeptical that the president has this authority under this 1977 law to impose tariffs across the board. Now, what this 1977 law does is it gives the president the power to, quote unquote, regulate importation of foreign goods. And that's very broad language, but no president has ever in the past used it to impose tariffs. Notably that Congress actually gave President Biden a discrete separate authority to impose tariffs on Russia, even though he had been using that same law to do other kinds of sanctions. Now, what the administration argued is that, well, Nixon did something like this in 1971 and imposed tariffs on across the board basis to remedy balance of payments deficit. And he invoked a precursor to this 1977 law that was also emergency powers, and that therefore he did it, and then an appellate court at that point also upheld those tariffs. But one, it's a different law. Two, as several of the judges on the panel pointed out, the Nixon tariffs were very different. They were much more limited in scope than the president's authority. They're not just willy-nilly imposed. They also were temporary. They only lasted a few months. And so that is one distinction. But I think another important point is that the Supreme Court's major questions doctrine has really developed in the decades since, in that the Supreme Court has held in many cases that you need express congressional authorization for such actions that have enormous political or economic significance. And there's no doubt that tariffs are one of those. And so it's pretty clear that the Congress never authorized these tariffs. And I think that where the judges were leaning is that they're probably likely to strike them down under the major questions doctrine. And the question is then, will the administration appeal to the Supreme Court? And if so, how long will a decision take on that? And you could be left with tariffs for another year or so. But then when they do, I think it could be a 9-0 decision. And when they do strike those down, what does the president do next? Well, he's already said that he's going to use Section 232, which allows him to impose tariffs for national security reasons, and extend those to some goods. Like he's done that with copper. He's done it for steel and aluminum. Now he's threatening them for pharmaceutical imports. So you could see him doing that for more goods. His administration has also floated using Section 338 of the Smoot-Hawley Act, which provides some pretty broad authorities too. So the tariffs aren't going to necessarily go away, even if you get an eventual Supreme Court that strikes them down.
Thank you, Alicia and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.